Hidden hunger. It's a very real concept. This is a definition that has literally been used by the UN, the USDA, and just in general health organizations across the world. And hidden hunger is referencing to the fact that today's produce, even if you are to shop the outside aisles of your supermarket, tend to lack nutrients. In particular, things like calcium, iron, protein, riboflavin, aka B2, vitamin C. The list literally goes on and on. This has resulted in people never feeling satisfied, increases in obesity rates, you name it. So today's video, we're going to look at what exactly is causing hidden hunger, what exactly is causing lack of nutrients in your food, and you'll be shocked. It's not necessarily the fact that the soil is depleted. It is a multi-factor issue. And ultimately speaking, we're going to look at what it's going to look like as a correction or a fix on the world of mass agriculture, all the way to what the fix or the correction is in regards to your home garden. So let's get into it. Before we jump in, if you're new to the Geek Crew, I do want to say that I am slightly qualified to speak about this solely because I have studied soil science. I have a degree in it, actually. I have and work in the world of agriculture, and I also have family that farm. So these three factors make me feel, I mean, you could have a totally different opinion, but make me feel like I'm slightly qualified to talk on terms of soil health and nutrients and how it affects plants. So that's a little bit of my background. Take it for what it is. So 2004 is one study that actually showed there was a massive difference in nutrient contents from 2004 to the 1950s. We're not talking small differences. We're talking anywhere from 38% decreases to 15-20% decreases on the low end. So this is quite substantial when we're talking per volume of food. That would mean on the high end, you would have to eat double the amount of food to be able to get the same level of, say, iron, as an example. Now, Google, the internet, argues that there's 4 kind of main causes for this. I would argue there's 5 causes for this. Number 5 is my personal opinion. So I'm just going to get that one out of the way first. But regardless, that's what we're going to talk about here today, is the 5 factors that are legitimate and how we can go about correcting them, if it's even possible. Number 1, again, my opinion, is that not all soils are created equal. What I mean by that is that a tomato grown in a sandier soil is not going to have the same nutrient input if the same input from the world of fertilizer, organic or otherwise, placed in that environment is the same. Sandier soils, and I'm specifically speaking to the destruction of the rainforest for use in agricultural food production, that soil naturally is going to be less in macro and micronutrients because sandier soil has a lower cation exchange capacity. You combine that with the exposure to higher levels of moisture, you end up with more leaching, you end up with more loss. And if we are not adding or rejuvenating that soil, the actual soil itself will be nutrient depleted. And the opposite side of the scale is, say, like a clay soil. Very high cation exchange capacity. The inputs could arguably be a little bit lower because leaching and volatilization is a little bit lower. And therefore, you could argue that those plants are able to access nutrients a little bit easier, a little bit more effectively. So because not all soils are created equal, and because our food supply comes from an international pool of stuff, some foods grown in, say, Mexico could have a lower nutrient content than something that is grown in, say, Ukraine, because Ukraine has a very nice loamy agricultural soil. So I do think that where the food comes from has a big factor on the nutrient content within it. Now that's my personal opinion. Let's get in the 4 that actual Google says matter, or science says matters. Number 1 is breeding and crop selection. We know there's GMO, we know there's hybrids, and then we know there's heirlooms. These 3 all have been selectively bred to give us a specific result. Yes, even the organic heirlooms. We have, as humans, selectively chosen seeds to save. And these seeds we choose to save over thousands of years are drastically different than what the parent plant looked like. And it's because we selected the biggest, the best, the tastiest, etc. and so forth of said plant. Now, when we start adding in things like GMO and hybrids, things actually start to change a little bit more. One example of this actually is the world of lodging. Lodging is a concept that we commonly see in the world of grains. So this is wheat, barley, rye, those 3 in particular we tend to see quite often. And lodging is the concept that the plant from soil to head is longer, and this longer stem length between the ground to the head where the seeds are can result in the plant flopping over. Now this flop is various different reasons. It can be the actual head itself filled with seed is too heavy, resulting in it falling over. It can be wind, it can be animals, it can be humans, you name it. But regardless, when the plant falls over, it is much more difficult to harvest, if not impossible, without some pretty specialized equipment. And when I say impossible, I mean farmers aren't too inclined to destroying their combines because they want to pick up a bunch of rocks. So that's why they tend to avoid it when they plop over. And because of that, companies like Bayer, Monsanto, which are one and the same now, Cargill, you name it, have developed seeds that are lodge resistant and or don't lodge at all. And this is through various different processes, whether it's hybridization or genetically modification. Now, what they noted when they did this is they bred for shorter stems. And these shorter stems means that the plants are less likely to fall over. However, in this process, they never actually considered the changes in micronutrients. So as you can imagine, less photosynthesis, less biomass, it alters the ultimate nutrient, micro and macro, throughout that entire plant. So that's one example where we've seen changes in the volume of nutrients, particularly in the part that we eat. I personally have worked in a lab that bred hybridized wheat. I'm not going to say for who, NDAs are life. In that, they had begun to recognize the fact that there is nutrients lacking, and in particular, this case, it was iron. And we had a very specialized machine where you would harvest said, I'm not even going to say what plant, but the plant, you'd put it in a little petri dish, you'd pop it under this fancy piece of equipment, it scans it, and it tells you the percentage of iron. The goal was to reproduce and harness the power of whatever seed had the highest level of iron in it. They're trying to correct what has happened in regards to physicality being the main driver, obviously help in regards to the iron format, but that's just an example of where breeding has kind of done us dirty, if you will. Next up is soil depletion. Now, this is specific to soil nutrients. This one is probably at the bottom of the list for the reasons for why I think this has happened. The reason for that is because World War II was a time in which we had a lot of starvation, and we needed to somehow correct that on a mass scale. We invested in hybridization of seeds. We invested in how to mass apply nutrients. We invested in how to mass apply pesticides, all of which the sole purpose was to increase calories within the crops we were growing. And it was successful. It was hugely successful. So much so, 1961 to 2014, the yield, or the calories, if you will, have increased by 176% because of modern agricultural technology. Pretty impressive. Did the nutrients go with it? Not so much. But regardless, calorically, We really expanded our horizons and my waistline personally. But this in perspective, per hectare, we went from 1.1 tons of grain to 3.4 tons per hectare of grain. That's a lot. That's a big increase. And a ton looks like this. That's what a ton looks like. Now times that by 3. So diluted soil. Actually, the reason why I think this is at the bottom of the barrel for reasons for why it's happening is because it's possible in the world of agricultural production where you don't employ an agronomist. Just saying, you should probably hire one if you're farming. You don't have to be one that has like a university degree. They actually do put people in P of Ags that just have experience. So it's not like even in a expensive piece of paper world. It is literally just experience and exposure to knowledge. Just a side note there, because the university is really not that big of a deal, for being totally honest. I think it's more knowledge, just reading and learning, which is important. I know a lot of duds from universities. My sister would agree. She works in graduate studies. Horror stories. The world of soil depletion. If you're employing and utilizing the correct techniques, there's no reason why your soil should be depleted, particularly in macro or micronutrients. So that's why I think that it's at the bottom of the barrel. I don't know many farmers that don't care about nutrient deficiencies. I don't even know many gardeners that won't look at their soil or at their plants, how they're reacting, and think to themselves, what's missing here? How do I correct what's missing here? So I think that it's something that people are very aware of. So shockingly enough, it's actually not the nutrient physically being added to the soil that is the issue. What is the issue, and where the nutrients are depleted, is from the world of microbes. Microbes is the reason number 3 for why our food is lacking as much nutrients as it did 60 years ago. Microbes are miracle workers for the soil, for the world in general. They're like the little army that's behind the scenes. And they are able to do everything from releasing of micronutrients from the soil profile to make it bioavailable to the plant, to literally performing the carbon, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium, the salt, like you get the idea. Those nutrient cycles completely dependent on microbes. Now, when you take in, for example, the fact that conventional farmers will use seeds that are treated with fungicide to reduce dampening off, well, that fungicide in and of itself is going to give a layer of inhibition, if you will, for scientific terms, around that seed, which ultimately kills off the microbes in and around that seed. So it starts even from the seed level in conventional agriculture, and then it's exacerbated throughout the entire cycle of the plant via the use of insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, you name it, all of which some, actually glyphosate in particular, increases microbes. I know, very controversial. Many of you probably just unsubscribe, but I think you should subscribe because I don't lie to you guys. But what I will say is I think glyphosate is like that little term slash herbicide slash pesticide that they want you to focus on, so you ignore the horrible neurotoxin type herbicides such as insecticides. That's my tinfoil hat for the day. The destruction of microbes is ultimately changing how much how much nutrients in our soil is bioavailable to the plant. That is the key there, because bioavailability is what the plant is uptaking. And if it's not bioavailable, despite the fact that it's present, it is not uptaken. So very, very important factor there. Depletion of microbes through the decrease in organic material in conventional farming, the utilization of pesticides, some in particular, all the way to the seed treatments on the plants, the lack of water because of the fact that we're either tilling or we're not leaving, debris on the soil surface to help with water capture, you name it. All of these factor into decreasing microbe activity, microbe populations, and ultimately the cycle of nutrients, which in turn results in seeds or produce that has less bang for your buck per calorie. The other one they just give a blanket term to, which is like modern agricultural practices. So this is things like irrigation. So irrigation can be damaging just because of how it changes the soil pH, the removal of topsoils, pesticides, fertilizers, seed breeding, like all of it. That all of these things factor together to obviously decrease the bioavailability of nutrients and the nutrient that is being added, of course. So that's just like a blanket term. I'm not too sure why that's included kind of in the factor, but regardless, that is a concept that they have introduced. Before we get into our last concept as to why exactly soils are depleted in nutrients and why you have to eat more calories to be able to get the same amount of iron you got 60 years ago, let's talk about how you can find the solution to the first batch, because the last one there is literally no solution to on your own little scale. This bottom batch, there is a solution to. So the way to reverse this is to go with heirloom plants. Plants that haven't been necessarily engineered to give you more biomass, more calories, like more caloric bang for your buck, if you will, and ultimately are more in their natural state. So if you grow more heirloom plants, you're going to kind of remove the plant genetic factor from the equation. Now, the other side of this is actually encouraging microbes inside of your soil. So you can add nutrients, you can add conventional, organic, compost, you name it. I can almost guarantee, if you've watched my video on soil nutrient testing, I can almost guarantee you're not low in any nutrient, because I don't know many gardeners that don't care for their soil and aren't actively putting or giving back to what they've taken away. My only, I guess, caveat to that is don't overdo it. So keep in mind that while you can just load on nutrients, there is a balance there. And if you throw the balance off, like you put too much nitrogen, for example, you actually affect the uptake of other macro and micronutrients. So everything is relative. You don't want to go too far on the inputs end. Now, say you're reasonable with your inputs and what you put in. I have rules for this. Say you have a tomato plant. If you were to take the tomato plant, dehydrate it, grind it up, how much biomass would you have? Maybe like a little shot glass full, probably like a cup or two. That's how much compost has to go back into the position that you remove that tomato plant from. You're just giving back what you took away. So once you manage the seed themselves, you get an heirloom plant that is not selectively bred, loosely speaking. You add on the appropriate amount of micronutrient. The actual solution happens in the world of microbes. You want to encourage microbe development, if you will, and that video right there is going to tell you how to do that. So once you support microbes, then you support the nutrient cycling, the bioavailability of insoluble and soluble micronutrients, macronutrients, you name it, and that's going to be your solution on your home base. And actually, at an agricultural scale, the same concepts can be utilized. Obviously, there's going to be some slight adjustments there. But let's get into the last one. The last one that you, me, and the geek crew will never solve unless we take over the government. Which, I mean, I'm down for. Are you guys down for? The last one is climate change. Before you click off, just hear me out here. Regardless of what side of the spectrum you're on, whether you're absolutely climate change is happening, or if you are climate change is not a thing, I'm pretty middle on this. Regardless of that, increases in CO2 result in larger plants. The reason for the CO2 increasing, I'm not a climate scientist. I'm not even going to attempt to tell you the who, what's, where's, and whens and whys of why that's happening. But what I will say is that increased carbon dioxide results in increased photosynthesis. Increased photosynthesis results in more biomass. More biomass results in basically a diluted plant. So Say you're going to an all-inclusive resort in Mexico and you've sucked back more drinks than you ever have in your life and you're completely sober. Either A, you are a very well-rounded Canadian alcoholic because you've drank too much Canadian beer, or B, your liquor is diluted, and the plants themselves, as they get bigger, put on more biomass, they actually begin to decrease in micronutrient. More plant biomass does not necessarily translate into more micronutrient. Those two are not linear. They don't increase with each other. There can be a little bit of a separation there. So as carbon dioxide increases, which we know for a fact it has, the plants get larger and become diluted. So what you're consuming is a diluted version, nutrient-wise, than what maybe you consumed when carbon dioxide was lower in your lifetime or outside of your lifetime. A great example of this, like a real-time example, is not a real-time example at all. Dinosaurs. You look at dinosaurs. We look at imprints into rock as to what the size of the leaves look like, the size of the plants. We have big fossilized stumps. I love dinosaurs. I love dinosaurs. I love dinosaurs. I'm just saying. I'm fucking dinosaurs. I actually have a massive. My entire thigh is literally the T-Rex from Jurassic Park 1. Not that any of you care. I love dinosaurs. I love prehistoric times. Plants were bigger back then. The reason why plants were bigger back then is because we know that CO2 was higher back then. The reason we know CO2 was higher is because we can use ice cores, etc. and so forth. So this increase in carbon dioxide results in bigger plants, which results in a diluted plant. Now, if you're more interested on how you as a gardener is affected by the world of climate change, you're gonna want to check out this video right here. And down there is what Google says you should watch. So they know more than I do. Go check them out. Anyways, the society coming up, we're in trouble. I'm joking because I'm part of that. I'm a millennial. Anyways,